Everybody, it's Jeff at contextual.io, and in this video, we're going to do lesson number 2 of the Contextual Basic Developer course. You may remember that at the end of lesson 1, we had successfully created an object type called a weather report, a flow that served up an HTML form for submitting a weather report and allowed that form to submit the report via an API endpoint called /submit. And finally, here is the web form that we were using to submit the weather report. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on logging and error handling in contextual flows. Obviously, even though it's a low-code platform, it's very easy to use. Things can still go wrong, and you have to be able to debug your flows with log messages. And when an error occurs, you need to be able to see that error and understand what happened. The way that we do both of those things in contextual is with this logtap node. And so in order to log out information during a flow, you simply drag the logtap node onto the wire and place it between whatever two other nodes you wish. Then you open the logtap node, and it's important to do a couple of things here. Number one, give the node a name. I'm going to call this one get/form because it comes right after the HTTP node for getting the form. That'll allow me to quickly understand which nodes I'm seeing the output for in the log. Second thing is, what do you want to log out? You can log any specific message property. Remember, the message is that object that gets passed from node to node in a flow. So you can log any specific message property that you want, or you can select a complete message object here. Finally, the log level. By default, log level is set to info, and that's generally correct as long as you're not logging an error. So in this case, we're not logging an error, so I'm going to leave it set to info. However, it's important to understand that the log levels for debug and info only work by default in the flow editor itself. And we're going to look at these logs in two places, in the editor and then later in the agent log viewer. So by default, log level of info only works in the editor, not in the agent log viewer. That's because we don't want to fill up the agent logs with information at the info or the debug levels because nothing's wrong, right? So we restrict the logging of a runtime agent to only warning or error. This one is not a warning or error, so it is appropriately categorized as info. Now I'm going to drag or put another one, and I'm going to do a copy and paste to do this. I'm going to put another one after the template, and now just change the name to something like log template. Now I'm going to do the same thing for my second endpoint. And again, change the names. This one will be post/submit. And this one will be create report results. Great. So now I've got some logs. So I'm going to push save. And in order to test this in the editor, though, I have to have a way of actually executing the flow. That's not something we did in the first lesson. In order to test the execution of flows in the editor, we use what is called an inject node. The inject node allows you to basically kick off the execution of the flow using this little button that's next to the inject node. And in order to do that, I simply need to wire the inject node in to the spot where I want the execution of the flow to begin. So I'm going to push save again. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm on the debug pane over here on the right-hand side. You see there's the right side set of panes that include the one that has the little bug on it. That's the debug pane for all debug messages. So make sure you're on that pane, and then simply click the little button that's that's part of, on the left side of the inject node, and you're going to see the output show up over here. And I'm going to see two log messages, right? Because I have two log tap nodes, one called get/form, the other called log template. And you can see both of those, node get/form and node log template. You also see what looks like kind of an error here, which it says no response object from the HTTP response node. That's because there wasn't a real HTTP request to respond to, so you get this little error, but that is okay in this case, right? So we're able to test the execution here and see that, in fact, the payload being logged out by log template is, in fact, my HTML and JavaScript that would be returned to the browser. Super. So now we understand how to add log tap nodes into a flow and how to test that with an inject node so that we can actually see the log messages in the debug pane. The next thing we want to do is learn how to handle an error. Errors in flows are handled by a catch node, very similar to the way you would use a catch statement in JavaScript to catch an exception. We do the same thing in a flow. We use a catch node. So we drag a catch node onto the canvas, and immediately after you have a catch node, you pretty much always want to have a log tap node, because the catch node by itself does not log out what error occurred. You need to do that yourself. So I'm going to put a log tap node there. I'm going to give it the name error, leave it as complete message object, but now I'm going to set the log level to error. And that's going to guarantee that I would see that in the agent logs from a live running agent. Finally, then, I need to respond to the original inbound HTTP request, right? Remember that this catch node is going to receive the execution of the flow when an error occurs up here somewhere. So that means that there will have been an error in the response either to this HTTP node or this one. And in order for the flow to complete, I must respond to that inbound HTTP request. And I do that in exactly the same way as we did before, using an HTTP response node. And I'll edit it, but this time something went wrong. So I'm going to return a server error with a status code 500, which basically means we don't know what went wrong, but something went wrong. And I'm going to push save. Now, I want to be able to test this new catch node, but in order to do that, I actually have to generate an error. But there's really nothing about this flow here in the editor that's going to make it easy for me to generate that error condition. So the next thing that I'm going to do is go to my object type, open that up, go to the schema, and I'm going to modify the schema for temperature to have a minimum value and a maximum value of minus 100 Celsius and plus 100 Celsius. I'm going to save that change to the object type, come back over here to my flow editor, and now I could potentially test this. But before I can do that, I have to actually be able to test not this path up here with the get on form, but rather test this path with the submit of the weather report. So in order to do that, I need another inject node, and I'm going to put it right here above the submit form, wire it in right here, because it's essentially taking this place of the submit form node from a testing perspective. I'm going to set the payload type to JSON, and then I'm going to create a payload in here, temperature, and I'm going to give it an invalid temperature, 101, station ID, we use Jeff again, and that now represents an invalid weather report. So what's going to happen? When I use the inject node to test this path of execution, the submit form path, it's going to inject that in message.payload. It's going to log out that payload in this logtap node, and then it's going to hit this create weather report, create object node, which is going to try to create a weather report using what's in message.payload. And because what's in message.payload isn't valid according to the schema for the object type, this node is going to throw an error. It's going to throw an exception, and my catch node down here is going to catch that exception, log it out, and return a 500 to the browser if you were actually doing this from a browser, which we will in just a minute. So I'm going to save that change. I'm going to clear my debug pane using this little delete all button. And now I'm going to test. Actually, let me do one more thing. Test error. I'm going to give this guy a name, test error. Push save again. Okay, so now I'm ready to go. I'm going to push the button, and you're going to see on the right-hand side now that we got the log output from post/submit as expected. And now also as expected, we got the log output from the error log node. And if I open this up and open up the details of the error, you're going to see an error message here that tells us, in fact, that that particular parameter or property, temperature, must be less than or equal to 100, and I submitted one that was 101. You can see it here in message.payload. So that's how we test a catch node inside the editor. We have to generate the error condition so that the catch node will work inside the editor. But now let's actually do this outside the editor. Let's do a test and show you how to look at the logs in the agent log viewer. So in order to do that, we need to go back over here to the console. We go to agents, and you're going to see on our submit weather report agent, it's showing an update available on the flow version. That's because we've been changing the flow in the editor and we haven't restarted the agent. So the agent is still running the old version of the flow at the moment. So you're going to see something like this: new flow version available. Your version numbers are going to be different than mine. And you're going to click on update to whatever your version says. And it's going to prompt you to restart the agent, because updating the version can't take effect unless you actually restart the agent. Having done that, we go to the Operations tab, and you'll see now that there are two instances listed in the Operations tab. The old one, which still shows as running, and the new one, which shows as pending. And we have to refresh at the moment in order to see changes to that. So every few seconds, you'll want to refresh to see if it's changed. And eventually we're going to see the new one that shows as pending at the moment. We're going to see it go to the running state. And once it goes to the running state, like it is here now, then we'll see the old agent disappear. And now we have one agent instance running, and it is only the new agent instance that is running. So now we're going to test, not in the editor, but through our web form. I'm going to refresh that page, and I'm going to go ahead and submit two things: a valid weather report. So we'll start with one that's valid, 25 and station ID Jeff, and a weather report was submitted successfully. Now we'll go here and submit the invalid one with 101 degrees Celsius, and we get an error submitting the report. So now let's go back to the console, and I'll show you how to look at the logs from this agent. That happens on the Logs tab, and you will notice that I have agent logs, what are called agent logs, and I have a lot of them, but I only have one flow log. And that's because of what I said earlier about log levels. Agent logs are generated every single time an agent is executed. And so you'll see an agent log, both this one for my valid test that I did with 25 degrees Celsius, and I'll see another agent log for the 101 degrees Celsius, but I'm only going to see the flow log for the error. Why? Because all of these log tap nodes were at the info level, and once again, info log level does not get used in an executing agent, but the error log level does. And so we only end up with a flow log for the error case because that's the one that used the appropriate error log level. So if I click on this log, you will see that it is, in fact, it contains the error from that log tap node called error. And you'll see the payload just like we did in the editor, and you'll see the error exactly again like we did in the editor. So what you see in the editor is going to be basically the same as what you see in the agent log viewer, just that in this case, the agent log viewer could also be logging out errors or other messages from more than one agent, because you could be running many instances of this particular agent, and all of those logs are going to go to this same place for your viewing. So that's it. Congratulations. You've made it to the end of lesson number 2 of the Contextual Basic Developer course. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.